I never imagined my life would come to this. If someone had told me a year ago that my seemingly perfect marriage to Sarah would unravel like this, I would have laughed in their face. Sarah was the love of my life. Or at least I thought she was. Beautiful, confident, and fiercely ambitious, she seemed like the perfect partner. We had been married for 15 years, had 2 amazing kids, and lived in a house that felt like the embodiment of our success. For my 40th birthday, Sarah went all out. She organized a lavish party at our house, inviting friends, family, and coworkers. The theme was milestones and memories, a clever nod to my midlife milestone and our supposedly beautiful memories together. She spent weeks planning every detail, the catering, the music, the decorations. She even hired a professional photographer to capture the evening. On the night of the party, I couldn't help but feel grateful for her effort. Our friends marveled at how Sarah had made the house look like a 5-star event venue. As the guests trickled in, I greeted everyone with a smile, basking in the glow of the moment. But there was one man in the crowd I didn't recognize. He was tall, lean, and exuded a confidence that made me instinctively wary. Sarah introduced him as Jason, a coworker from her marketing firm. I shook his hand, noting his firm grip and overly familiar smile. I brushed it off, thinking I was being paranoid. After all, Sarah had never given me a reason to doubt her. As the evening went on, I noticed little things that didn't sit right. Jason seemed to stick close to Sarah, and their interactions had a casual intimacy that didn't match their just coworkers narrative. They laughed at inside jokes, exchanged fleeting touches, and seemed to have their own bubble amidst the crowd. My friends noticed too. One even nudged me, saying, "Looks like Sarah's got a new best friend." I forced a laugh, dismissing it as harmless banter. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and by the end of the night, I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that something was off. As the party wound down, Jason was one of the last guests to leave. He thanked Sarah for the wonderful evening, with a lingering handshake that made my stomach turn. When he finally walked out the door, I turned to Sarah, forcing a smile. "Seems like Jason had a great time," I said. She hesitated for a split second. So brief I almost missed it, before replying, "He's just a coworker, honey. Don't overthink it." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. The days after the party were uneventful on the surface, but my mind was anything but calm. Jason lingered in my thoughts like an unwelcome shadow. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something about him unsettled me. Sarah seemed normal, too normal, even. She was cheerful, chatty, and affectionate, as though she could sense my unease and was trying to smother it with kindness. But her phone buzzed more often than usual, and she was quicker to shield the screen. Every time I asked her about work, she brushed off my questions with vague answers. "Busy as always," she'd say with a casual shrug. One evening, I came home early from work, hoping to surprise her with dinner. As I walked through the door, I heard her laugh, soft and intimate, not the kind of laugh you'd expect during a business call. She was sitting in the kitchen, her back to me, her phone pressed to her ear. "I can't believe you said that," she giggled. "You're terrible." The tone of her voice was unmistakable, flirty, light, the way she used to talk to me when we first started dating. My stomach twisted, but I played it cool. "Hey, babe," I called out as I set the takeout bags on the counter. She flinched, ending the call so abruptly it felt like she'd slammed a door in my face. "Hey," she said, her smile a little too wide. "What's all this?" "Thought I'd bring dinner," I said, studying her face. She was flushed, her eyes darting everywhere except at mine. "Who were you talking to?" "Just Stacy from work," she said quickly, waving her hand dismissively. "She's planning a client pitch, and we got sidetracked." "Uh-huh," I said, forcing a smile. "Sounds fun." We ate in silence, her fingers tapping nervously on the table while I tried to act like everything was fine. Inside, my thoughts were spinning like a storm. Who was she really talking to? Was it Jason? Or was I losing my mind? Later that night, when she was in the shower, I did something I never thought I'd do. I checked her phone. My hands trembled as I unlocked it. She'd always shared her passcode with me, a gesture that once made me feel secure. But what I found didn't reassure me. The texts were innocent on the surface, but there were dozens of them, all from Jason. Jason, hope you made it home safe. You looked amazing tonight. Sarah, you're sweet. Thanks for helping me clean up. Jason, anything for you. Sarah, you spoil me too much. My blood boiled as I scrolled further. There were no overt declarations of love or anything incriminating, but the tone, the familiarity, was enough to make my chest tighten. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I decided to watch and wait. If there was something to uncover, I needed more proof. My instincts screamed that this wasn't just my imagination. The next morning, as Sarah left for work, she kissed me on the cheek like nothing had happened. Don't forget, we've got dinner at my mom's this weekend, she said with a smile. Sure thing, I replied, my voice steady despite the war raging inside me. When her car disappeared down the street, I stood in the driveway, gripping my coffee mug so tightly I thought it might shatter. Something was happening, something I couldn't ignore, and I was going to find out exactly what it was. The days turned into weeks, and the unease in my gut only grew stronger. Sarah's behavior hadn't changed much on the surface, but I was attuned to the subtleties, the quick glance at her phone, the guarded way she responded when I asked about her day, the lingering smell of a cologne that wasn't mine. Jason's name kept cropping up in conversation, always in passing. Jason's been great with the new campaign, she'd say, or Jason suggested this great place for client meetings. She always spoke of him casually, like he was just another coworker. But I wasn't buying it. I decided to do some digging. At work, I spent my lunch break scrolling through Sarah's social media accounts. I combed through her posts, looking for anything unusual. Most of it was normal, pictures of us, the kids, her work events. But then I stumbled across a photo from the night of my birthday party, one I hadn't noticed before. It was a group shot, with Sarah standing in the middle, her arm casually slung around Jason's shoulder. His hand rested a little too low on her waist, and the way they smiled at each other sent a jolt of anger through me. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I needed answers. That Friday, I told Sarah I'd be working late, but instead, I drove to her office. I parked down the street, far enough that she wouldn't notice my car, and waited. The minutes dragged on, but just as the clock hit 7:30 p.m., I saw her step out of the building. My heart sank as Jason followed close behind. They walked side by side, laughing at something he said, their body language easy and familiar. I watched as they got into separate cars and drove off. A surge of relief washed over me. They weren't going somewhere together. But then Jason's car turned onto the same street as Sarah's, maintaining a deliberate distance. I followed them, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. They stopped at a small, dimly lit cafe on the edge of town. I parked across the street, my heart pounding as they walked inside. Through the window, I could see them sitting at a table near the back, leaning in close, their heads nearly touching. This wasn't a business meeting. It was personal. My stomach churned as I watched Sarah laugh at something he said, her hand briefly brushing his. I felt like an intruder in my own life, watching a scene unfold that I had no place in. I sat there for nearly an hour, torn between storming in and demanding an explanation or waiting to see what would happen. Eventually, they left together, Jason's hand resting lightly on Sarah's lower back as he guided her to her car. I waited until she drove off before heading home, my mind racing. By the time she walked through the door, I was sitting at the kitchen table, the scene replaying in my head. "Hey," she said brightly, setting her bag down. "You're home earlier than I expected." I forced a smile, my heart thundering in my chest. Yeah, things wrapped up sooner than I thought. She kissed me on the cheek, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. "I'm going to take a shower," she said, already heading upstairs. I watched her go, my jaw clenched. Something inside me snapped that night. Whatever was going on between her and Jason, it was more than just friendship or business. I needed proof, something concrete that I could confront her with, and I was willing to do whatever it took to get it. The following weekend, Sarah was busier than usual. She claimed she had back-to-back meetings, but I noticed the way she avoided eye contact when she said it. By now, I wasn't taking her words at face value. I had a plan, a risky one, but I was desperate for answers. On Monday, I called in sick to work. After Sarah left for her office, I started my day by searching her things. I hated myself for stooping this low, but I needed to know the truth. Her phone was locked, but her laptop wasn't. Scrolling through her email, I found nothing incriminating, at first. Then I checked the deleted items folder. There it was, an email thread between her and Jason. Jason, can't wait to see you tonight. Your idea for dinner at that Italian place was perfect. Sarah, me neither. Feels like forever since we had a night to ourselves. See you at 7. The date on the email was from a week ago, the same night she told me she was working late. My heart sank as I stared at the words. There was no denying it anymore. This wasn't paranoia or jealousy. It was real. I sat there for a long time, trying to figure out what to do next. Confronting Sarah now would only give her time to come up with excuses or cover her tracks. I needed to catch her in the act. I spent the next few days researching private investigators, eventually hiring one with glowing reviews. His name was Chris, and he had a reputation for discretion and results. When we met, I laid everything out: the emails, the strange behavior, the cafe incident. Chris listened patiently, taking notes before nodding. I'll get you what you need, he said simply. It didn't take long. By the end of the week, Chris had photos, videos, and even audio recordings. The evidence was damning. Sarah and Jason meeting at a hotel under false pretenses, holding hands at the park, sharing intimate moments that left no room for interpretation. The hardest part was hearing the recordings. In one, Jason asked her, "When are you going to tell him?" "I don't know," she replied, her voice laced with guilt. "It's not that simple." "It's been months," Jason pressed. "Don't you think he deserves the truth?" I couldn't listen to the rest. Months? How long had this been going on? The thought of them laughing at me behind my back, treating me like a fool, made my blood boil. That weekend, Sarah suggested we host a small dinner for a few close friends. She acted like nothing was wrong, smiling as she listed the menu and made plans. I played along, keeping my rage bottled up. Inside, I was planning the perfect moment to reveal everything. When Saturday night arrived, I watched Sarah flutter around the house, setting the table and arranging flowers like a perfect hostess. Jason was on the guest list, of course. I made sure of it. The trap was set. The night of the dinner party was one of the longest I'd ever endured. I felt like a volcano on the verge of erupting, every smile and laugh from Sarah pushing me closer to the edge. She was radiant, wearing a sleek black dress that hugged her figure perfectly. It was the same dress she'd worn the night of my birthday party, the night Jason first showed up in my life. The guests began to arrive around 7 p.m. The house was filled with chatter and laughter, the sound of wine glasses clinking, and the rich aroma of the dinner Sarah had prepared. Jason arrived fashionably late, his smile wide and his confidence palpable. I greeted him at the door, shaking his hand and offering a tight-lipped smile. "Good to see you again, Jason," I said, my voice calm despite the storm brewing inside me. "You too, man," he replied, completely oblivious to what I knew. As the evening unfolded, I watched them closely. Their stolen glances, their shared laughter, the subtle ways they leaned toward each other when they thought no one was looking. It all confirmed what I already knew. My chest ached with anger and betrayal, but I kept my composure. The night went on, the tension in me building with every passing minute. I waited until dessert was served, a decadent chocolate cake Sarah had baked herself. As everyone settled in with their slices and sips of coffee, I tapped my glass, signaling that I had something to say. "Everyone," I began, forcing a smile as the room quieted. "I just want to take a moment to thank you all for being here tonight. It means a lot to have friends like you." My gaze lingered on Jason and Sarah, their smiles faltering as they noticed the edge in my tone. "But," I continued, my voice tightening, "I think it's only fair to acknowledge the elephant in the room." A murmur rippled through the group, confused glances exchanged. Jason shifted uncomfortably in his seat, while Sarah's smile froze, her eyes darting to mine. "You see," I said, pulling out a folder from beneath the table, "there's something I've been meaning to share with everyone." I opened the folder, pulling out a series of photos Chris had taken. I laid them out on the table, one by one. Sarah and Jason holding hands, sharing a kiss, walking into a hotel together. Gasps erupted around the room as the guests leaned in to get a better look. Sarah's face went pale, her hands trembling as she tried to stammer an explanation. I don't know what this is, she began, her voice shaking. Save it, Sarah, I said coldly, cutting her off. I know everything. The emails, the hotel, the months of lying. You thought you could play me for a fool, but the game's over. Jason stood abruptly, his face flushed. I think I should go, he muttered. Oh no, Jason, I said, stepping in front of him. You're not going anywhere. You wanted to be part of this family so badly, didn't you? Well, here's your moment. Sarah buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. The room was dead silent except for the faint sound of her tears. Our friends stared in stunned disbelief, unsure of what to do or say. I hope you're happy, both of you, I said, my voice laced with venom. You've destroyed a marriage, a family, and for what? A few months of sneaking around like teenagers? Jason looked at Sarah, his expression torn between guilt and frustration. This wasn't how I wanted things to come out, he said quietly. No, I shot back. You wanted it to stay hidden, didn't you? Well, I'm done hiding. I turned to Sarah, my voice softer now but no less firm. You've made your choice, Sarah. I hope it was worth it, because this is the last night you'll spend under my roof. With that, I walked out of the dining room, leaving the stunned silence behind me. Upstairs, I packed a bag, my mind racing with anger and heartbreak. Downstairs, the party was over, but the consequences had only just begun. The house was eerily silent when I came back downstairs, my bag slung over my shoulder. Sarah was sitting on the edge of the couch, her face buried in her hands, while Jason hovered near the door, awkward and out of place. The guests had quietly slipped away, their expressions a mix of pity and discomfort. Where are you going? Sarah's voice cracked as she looked up, her tear-streaked face pale. Away, I said flatly, avoiding her gaze. You made your bed, Sarah. Now you can lie in it, alone. Please, don't do this, she pleaded, standing and moving toward me. I made a mistake. Mistake? I snapped, my voice rising. A mistake is forgetting to turn off the stove or backing into a parked car. This was a choice. Over and over again. For months. Hell, maybe even years. Don't insult me by calling it a mistake. She flinched, tears spilling down her cheeks. I didn't mean for this to happen, she said weakly. I still love you. Stop, I interrupted, holding up my hand. Don't you dare say that. Love doesn't look like this, Sarah. Love doesn't lie, cheat, and humiliate. You don't love me. You love yourself. Jason took a hesitant step forward, his hands raised as if to diffuse the tension. Look, man, I think we all need to calm down. Shut up, I growled, my glare pinning him in place. You don't get to speak. You don't get to explain or justify or do anything other than leave. He looked at Sarah, who nodded through her tears. Just go, Jason, she whispered, her voice hollow. He hesitated, then turned and left without another word. The sound of the door clicking shut echoed through the house, a stark reminder of the emptiness left in his wake. I turned back to Sarah, who was now clutching the back of the couch for support. I'm filing for divorce, I said coldly. First thing Monday morning. You'll get the papers, and I expect you to sign them without a fight. Her eyes widened in panic. No, please, we can fix this. I'll cut off all contact with Jason. I'll go to therapy, whatever it takes. Don't throw everything away. You already threw it away, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I trusted you, Sarah. I built a life with you, shared everything I had, and this is how you repay me. She sank to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But the pain of her betrayal was too fresh, too deep. I'll stay at a hotel tonight, I said, turning toward the door. But when I come back tomorrow, I expect you to start packing. This house? It's mine. The kids? They're staying with me. And as for you? You can take whatever fits in your car and go wherever Jason's waiting for you. Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't turn back. I couldn't. Every second I stayed in that house felt like it was suffocating me. The drive to the hotel was a blur. My hands shook on the steering wheel, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on me like a boulder. I felt angry, hurt, humiliated. But most of all, I felt free. For years, I'd been living a lie without even knowing it. Now, the truth was out, and I was finally free to rebuild my life, on my terms. As I checked into the hotel and collapsed onto the bed, one thought echoed in my mind. She didn't just betray me. She destroyed everything we built together. And she would pay for it, one way or another. The next morning, I woke up in the stiff hotel bed with a crushing weight in my chest. The events of the previous night came rushing back, vivid and raw. For a brief moment, I wondered if it had all been a nightmare, but the dull ache in my heart told me otherwise. I forced myself to get up, shower, and head to the lobby for a coffee. The air was thick with an unfamiliar mix of freedom and uncertainty. For the first time in years, I had no plan, no anchor, just the cold realization that my marriage was over. As I sipped my coffee, I dialed the number for my lawyer, Greg, a no-nonsense guy who had helped me with a property dispute years ago. He answered on the second ring, his voice brisk but polite. "Greg, it's me," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "I need your help. I'm filing for divorce." There was a pause. "Sorry to hear that, man," he said, his tone softening. "What happened?" "She cheated," I said bluntly, "with a guy from work. I've got proof, and I'm not looking to negotiate. She's not getting the house, the kids, or a single cent more than the law requires." "Understood," Greg replied. "Do you have the evidence with you?" "Yes," I said, thinking of the folder Chris had handed me. "Photos, emails, recordings, the works." "Good," he said. "Come by my office today. We'll get the ball rolling." After hanging up, I finished my coffee and headed back to the house. I'd given Sarah the night to process everything, but now it was time to set things in motion. When I arrived, the house felt different, emptier, somehow. Sarah was sitting on the couch, her eyes swollen from crying. She looked up when I walked in, her expression a mix of hope and dread. "Did you mean what you said last night?" she asked, her voice trembling. "About the divorce?" "Yes," I said firmly. "I've already called my lawyer." Her face crumpled, but I didn't waver. "Sarah, this isn't something I can forgive. You didn't just make a mistake. You destroyed our marriage. And now, you'll have to live with the consequences." "I'll fight for the house," she said suddenly, desperation flashing in her eyes. "And for the kids. You can't just throw me out like this." I scoffed, shaking my head. "The house is in my name, Sarah. Always has been. And as for the kids, do you really think a judge will side with someone who's been sneaking around for months?" She fell silent, her gaze dropping to the floor. I felt a pang of something. Regret, perhaps, but I quickly pushed it aside. "Start packing," I said coldly. "You can stay here for a few more days, but after that, you're out." She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came. Defeated, she nodded and turned toward the stairs. Once she was gone, I sank into the chair by the window, staring out at the street. This was my life now, a broken marriage, a house that felt more like a battlefield than a home, and a future I could barely imagine. But as I sat there, something stirred in me. A small, determined voice that whispered, "This isn't the end. It's a new beginning." The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings, decisions, and tense exchanges. Greg, my lawyer, wasted no time. He was relentless, laying out a strategy that would leave Sarah with as little as possible while protecting the things I cared about: our kids, the house, and my dignity. "You're in a strong position," Greg said during our first meeting, his tone confident. "The evidence you've provided is solid. The infidelity will weigh heavily in your favor when it comes to custody and assets." I nodded, but the weight of the situation still sat heavily on my chest. I wasn't doing this out of spite. I was doing it because I couldn't allow her betrayal to take more from me than it already had. The legal process began quickly. Sarah was served the divorce papers 2 days later while she was still at the house. I'd made sure to be elsewhere when it happened, not wanting to witness the moment. When I returned home later that evening, the tension was palpable. She was in the kitchen, staring at the papers on the counter. When she heard me walk in, she turned, her eyes red and puffy. "You really went through with it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I told you I would," I replied, keeping my tone even. Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, I saw the woman I used to love, the one who smiled brightly on our wedding day, who held my hand during the births of our children, who laughed with me on lazy Sunday mornings. But then the memory of her betrayal came crashing back, and whatever softness I felt disappeared. "Is this what you really want?" she asked, her voice trembling. "To end everything like this?" "You ended it, Sarah," I said, my voice hard. "The moment you chose him over us." She flinched, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It wasn't like that." "Don't," I interrupted, holding up my hand. "Don't try to justify it. I don't care why you did it. All I care about now is moving forward." She nodded, defeated. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the papers that marked the end of our marriage. The custody battle begins. True to her earlier threats, Sarah fought back when it came to custody. Despite the evidence of her affair, she claimed to be the more stable parent, citing my long work hours and emotional distance as reasons she should have primary custody of the kids. I refused to let her win. I knew how much our children meant to me and how devastated they'd be if they were taken from the only home they'd ever known. Greg assured me we had a strong case, and I trusted him to handle the legal side while I focused on being there for the kids. Breaking the news to them was one of the hardest things I've ever done. They were too young to fully understand the complexities of what had happened, but old enough to sense that something was deeply wrong. "Why can't Mom stay here?" my youngest asked one night, his big, tear-filled eyes staring up at me. "Sometimes, grown-ups make mistakes," I said gently, struggling to find the right words. "And those mistakes mean we can't live together anymore. But no matter what, we both love you very much." It felt hollow even as I said it, but it was the best I could do. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into being the best father I could be. I cooked their favorite meals, helped with homework, and made time for movie nights and weekend outings. I wanted them to feel safe, even as their world was falling apart. The battle for custody dragged on for months, each court hearing draining me further. Sarah fought tooth and nail, painting herself as a devoted mother and downplaying her affair. But the evidence spoke louder than her words, and in the end, the judge ruled in my favor. I was awarded primary custody, with Sarah granted visitation rights. When the verdict was announced, I felt a wave of relief. For the first time in months, it felt like I had won something worth fighting for. After the custody ruling, the next step was dividing our assets. Sarah had tried to make threats about what she was entitled to, but Greg dismantled her arguments with the precision of a scalpel. The house was legally mine. My name was on the deed, and I had paid for it entirely. The prenuptial agreement we signed years ago ensured she couldn't touch my retirement fund or savings. What she did get was her car, some furniture, and a small portion of the joint account, which Greg negotiated down to the bare minimum. Watching her pack up her life into a few suitcases was a surreal experience. She looked lost, like someone waking from a dream and finding herself in a nightmare. "Where will you go?" I asked one evening as she boxed up the last of her belongings. "Jason offered to let me stay with him," she muttered, avoiding my gaze. "Of course he did," I said bitterly. "Good luck with that." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The day she left was overcast, the kind of weather that felt fitting for the occasion. The kids were at school, sparing them the pain of watching their mother drive away. I stood in the doorway as she loaded the last box into her car, her movements slow and hesitant. "Goodbye, Sarah," I said as she climbed into the driver's seat. She hesitated, her hand on the door. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't respond. I just watched as she pulled out of the driveway and disappeared down the street. For the first time in years, the house was truly mine. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into rebuilding my life. The house was eerily quiet without Sarah, but I found solace in the stillness. I focused on my work, my kids, and myself, rediscovering hobbies I had abandoned over the years. Friends rallied around me, inviting me to dinners and weekends out, trying to fill the void that Sarah had left. At first, I resisted, but eventually, I started to enjoy their company. Each small step felt like a victory. News of Sarah and Jason's affair spread quickly, and it wasn't long before Jason faced his own consequences. His wife, furious and humiliated, filed for divorce and took their kids with her. His reputation at work suffered, and he eventually resigned under pressure. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Sarah moved in with him, but their relationship was strained. The passion that had fueled their affair couldn't withstand the harsh reality of their situation. I didn't feel pity for them, only a grim sense of satisfaction. Months later, I received a letter from Sarah. The sight of her handwriting made my chest tighten, but I forced myself to read it. In it, she apologized for everything. Her betrayal, her lies, the pain she had caused. She admitted that she had been selfish, chasing something she thought would make her happy but realizing too late that it wasn't worth the cost. "I don't expect forgiveness," she wrote, "but I needed you to know that I regret everything." I didn't respond. Some doors are meant to stay closed. Time has a way of healing wounds, even the deepest ones. A year after Sarah left, I met someone new, Mia, a kind, intelligent woman who worked in the same industry. Our connection was effortless, built on honesty and mutual respect. She wasn't Sarah, and that was a good thing. With Mia, there were no secrets, no games, just a genuine partnership. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. Looking back, I realized that my greatest revenge wasn't taking Sarah to court or watching Jason's life crumble. It was living well, rebuilding my life, finding love again, and being the father my kids needed. One day, while out with Mia and the kids, I saw Sarah at the grocery store. She looked tired, her smile forced as she pushed a cart down the aisle. Jason wasn't with her. Our eyes met briefly, but I didn't stop to say hello. I didn't feel anger or bitterness, just a quiet sense of closure. As we left the store, my youngest grabbed my hand and grinned up at me. "Dad, can we get ice cream?" "Of course," I said, smiling as I glanced at Mia. She nodded, her eyes warm and full of understanding. In that moment, I knew I had won. Not by taking everything from Sarah, but by reclaiming everything she tried to destroy. And that was a victory no one could take from me.